Okay. All right, let's get started. So sorry about the technical difficulties. Like I said, my name is Kari Parnan, and I'm really excited to be doing this Fiveable live stream for you tonight. I'm an AP biology teacher, been a teacher for about 8 years in the Illinois suburbs, and now I've moved to Michigan and mostly working for Fiveable. So I'm really excited for this school year to help you out with AP biology. Today is going to be all about water. Water is the most important substance, I would argue, in biology and in order to make life work. If that's why when NASA finds ice or water on other planets, there's a big freak out because it's possibility of life. And we'll get into why that is a little later. Real quick, if you don't already, go ahead and quickly follow Think Fiveable on Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube, because especially Twitter, that will keep you updated on exactly when the live streams are and what the topic is. It just reminders, especially if you have notifications on Twitter, it reminds me all the time to be able to watch what other people are doing. So if you haven't already, take a second to Think Fiveable. And then also, if you're taking notes today, so for example, if I'm watching a live stream like this, I'd have a notebook out and just for my drawings, taking notes. If you are taking notes, take a picture of your notes and then tag at Think Fiveable. And maybe your pretty notes will get featured on Twitter, Instagram, or somewhere on social media. All right, here we go. So that's where we're going with that. Today, more specifically, these are our big topics. I'm going to talk about the new AP exam just briefly. I think just talking about it a little bit each week is really helpful so that come May, you're not hit in the face with all the details. And then we're obviously going to get into the structure of water first, then hydrogen bonding, polarity, water behavior, and then if we've got time, I've got a few multiple choice practice questions and a free response. So I really hope to get into that with you. The sooner we start practicing that, the better for the AP exam. Okay, so AP review or AP changes. It used to be where AP biology had 4 big ideas. Now we're looking at 8 major units, which to be honest, as a student is probably going to be really helpful that you have these 8 units. They're nice and cohesive, but they're broken up a little bit more than they used to be. So unit 1, even if your teacher is not following these 8 major units necessarily, the content will all be hit. But I know that most AP biology teachers are starting the year with biochemistry. They might call it biochemistry, chemistry of life, chemistry review. They might have even had you work on this unit over the summer, depending on what school you go to. So this might be something that you did over the summer, but no matter what, it's really good practice. So if I could have everyone just type in this chat screen and let me know if this is the unit you're in right now. If you're learning about compounds and molecules and bonds, covalent, ionic, kind of a chemistry review, can you let me know that you're in that unit right now? So go ahead and take a second and just type and say, we're in this unit. Or say, I did this summer. So go ahead, because I'm going to make sure that my chats are working because I don't see anything yet. So I'll give everyone a second just to, again, say something real quick. Example, I'll type it in. I worked, or my AP bio teacher assigned biochem over the summer. So right now, all I see is my responses. So let's see. Okay. The reason I want to know that is just for my own good to see where we're at in terms of answering questions. So chemistry of life is going to be about 8 to 10% of the exam. And then similarly to previous years, you have half of your total AP score from your free response. The other half is multiple choice. The biggest change that I kind of like this year is that instead of 6 short free responses, there's 4. So I think that might afford some more time to answer the long ones or potentially the short ones. are just more data driven, it seems like, and they're more skill based rather than having certain pieces of content memorized, which is really nice because we don't really want everyone memorizing information. We want you thinking, we want you explaining, and the old way of learning biology of just memorizing everything is really going away. So those will be some things we'll work on too. We'll come up with some practice-free responses and really help you out for May. Okay, objectives for today. These are straight from the College Board. We want to be able to explain how properties of water that result from polarity and hydrogen bonding affect biological function. So it's really wordy, I get it. But the idea is you're not just, oh, there, I see people's responses, good. You're not just memorizing what's polarity and what's hydrogen bonding anymore. You need to explain how those properties then give things a biological function. And so it's a lot more in depth than one would think, especially if you have taken biology, maybe as a freshman, and now you're a senior taking AP. We're really stepping it up a notch and asking you to explain the why, the how, the where. Okay, good. So it looks like some of you said this is what we're learning. We did that unit already, so that'll be a good review for you. And that your class is not doing that first. Okay, all right. Phobos, what are you guys doing first? Some teachers like starting with evolution, I know. Some teachers like starting with ecology. Kind of just depends, especially if you live somewhere where you've got a good area in the fall to do some outdoor stuff and learn about ecosystems. All right, cool. Thanks, guys. Okay, so some keywords. You can jot these down if you want, or just kind of take a picture of the screen. You're doing ecology. Okay, I knew it because of the snow. That's all right. We live in Michigan, so I would like to do ecology first too because of the snow too. We have snow from in Michigan. We have snow sometimes from November to March or April, so we wouldn't be able to get outside almost the entire school year. So anyway, so these are some keywords we'll go over today. Hydrogen bond, polarity, cohesion, adhesion, surface tension, specific heat and heat capacity, solvent, solute, density, and heat of vaporization. I was reading through some of the AP College Board stuff, and surprisingly, what they wrote about was students in their free responses. Oh, hi, Madeline. I'm from Michigan, too. Awesome. Are you on the west side? We're on the west side of Michigan, right on the lake. It's great. Anyways, the College Board mentioned that in people's free responses, they were mixing up vocabulary quite often, like using the word proton and protein interchangeably, and things like polar and nonpolar incorrectly, and they just kind of flipped them. So they're not going to give you credit if you flip words like solvent and solute because they're very different, although they sound very similar. So I just want to make a note about those keywords. So take a picture of those or jot them down. I would recommend not filling these out as we go, but maybe after this, go back and see what you can fill in on your own. Oh, near Grand Rapids. Cool, Madeline. See what you can fill in on your own, just using your brain, because then you can really see what you took away from this, what you took away from class, possibly, because then you might realize, wow, I know everything but polarity, right? Or I know everything, but I keep messing up cohesion and adhesion, because again, it's words that sound similar. Okay, so we're going to start with the structure of water. So water's everywhere, right? We see it everywhere. We take showers in water all the time. We drink water. Our bodies are made up of almost all water. Even the blood running through your arteries and veins right now, lots of water in there. That's why if you are dehydrated, if you're not drinking enough water, it has catastrophic results on your body because we rely on water so much. Same thing with if you think about plants, right? Outdoors, if something doesn't get watered, it cannot survive. And so we all know water is H2O, right? But if we were to look at a 2D model of that, it's just showing a 1 oxygen atom with 2 hydrogens attached. If you haven't taken chemistry in a while, those 2 dots are representing valence electrons that are not bonded to anything. But those electrons still exhibit an electric force, and so that's why those hydrogens are kind of being pushed down, and makes water the shape that it is. So that's just a 2D model of H2O. We have oxygen and 2 hydrogens. If we were to look more closely at water molecules bonded together, that is where we start to see these hydrogen bonds come together. The biggest thing I want to make a distinction about of this picture right here is that the one water molecule of 1 oxygen and 2 hydrogens, they have a covalent bond with the oxygen and hydrogen. Remember, a covalent bond is where you're sharing electrons, so it's not an ionic bond where you've got complete movement of electrons. It's oxygen and hydrogen are sharing electrons really well, but we'll get to the next slide about polarity in a little bit. But then when water molecules come together, so here I've got 3 water molecules, the bonds between water molecules is a hydrogen bond. And we'll get more into that in a second with a different picture. But the reason hydrogen bonds form within water is because of the polarity of one water molecule. So I like this picture right here where it's showing oxygen in red and hydrogen in gray. So if you look at the red, it almost looks like a person pulling up and like turning red in the face, which I really like. And I kind of imagine oxygen to be that way. If you remember from oxygen or from chemistry, does anybody remember what it means to be electronegative? Go ahead and type it in the comments. If you remember, what does it mean for an atom to be electronegative? So if an atom is electronegative, just type it in. It's okay if you're not perfect with your wording. I'll give you a hint that oxygen is very electronegative. Strong negative charge, close. Not necessarily has a negative charge. You're really, really close, Ria. Hopefully I said that right. Electronegative has to do with an atom's tendency to pull electrons toward itself. So it's not necessarily ripping electrons off of anything, but if you're electronegative, you're going to be really greedy with your electrons. So if you have a covalent bond with another atom, you're going to unequally share those electrons. You're supposed to share it nice, but just like this picture here with the oxygen, kind of looks like someone's face turning red, like I said. I imagine it to be like pulling electrons closer to its nucleus or closer to its body, because we're talking about a personified oxygen atom here. And so oxygen then, if it has electrons closer to, yeah, Madeline, good, stronger pull on electrons. So because of that, oxygen has a partial negative charge. It's usually shown as a delta negative, or it looks like a little S. So if you see an S negative, that oxygen isn't fully negative, but it's partially negative. It's behaving that way because so many electrons, or the electrons, are close to it. And then your hydrogens are then partially positive because they're negative. They've moved further. Their negative electrons are further away from the atom. And that is why water is polar. So we talk about something being polar. Let's go to the next slide real quick. I'm going to skip that one. We'll talk about that in a second. We talk about water being polar. When we think of poles, you think of magnets sometimes, and how if we put a north and a south magnet together, what would happen? Would they attract or would they repel, right? I teach this in my physics class all the time. If you have opposites, they're going to attract. So if we have a water molecule, and here's that delta I was telling you about, here's an oxygen with a partial negative next to a different water molecule, and the hydrogen's partial positive charge, those are going to attract. Opposite charges attract. Oh, Zion. We'll get to that in a second. So actually, tell your teacher about Fiveable. Zion asked a good point about how do I successfully prepare. That's why we have Fiveable. There's going to be a live stream about every single topic in AP Biology. So tell your classmates about it. Tell your teacher about it, because we do run streams for teachers too. And you don't have to say it's because you don't know what you're doing, but yeah, tell your class about it. And we go over every little topic and can answer questions at the end as well. So that's something I wanted to mention in the beginning. If you look at the bottom of your screen, there's a thing you can click that says question or ask a question. So if anything comes up, ask a question just in case I don't see it on the right-hand side so that I can look at that. And then you all can actually look at the questions others asked and vote and say, like, oh, I really like that question from Madeline. I hope she answers it. And so if you vote for those questions, then I'll be able to more easily answer it. Just in case I get, 30 questions, I may not have time to answer all 30. So anyway, back to polarity of water. So water has oxygen and 2 hydrogens. Oxygen is electronegative. It's greedy. It's pulling those negative electrons closer to it. So it behaves negative. It's partially negative. So notice here we have 2 water molecules that form a hydrogen bond together. And that's where my previous slide was. Let me go back to it. Because it's one of the biggest misconceptions, and it just kills me because it's such a silly mistake. That students will talk about a water molecule itself. So this one that I have boxed in teal right here, that's one water molecule. And students will start talking about the hydrogen bonding of the molecule itself. And so there's a big difference between the type of bonds we see in one water molecule compared to a bunch of water molecules interacting with one another, right? So if I have one water molecule that we are looking at the intra, I-N-T-R-A, intramolecular bonds. And so that's a covalent bond between oxygen and hydrogen. They're sharing those electrons. If we're talking about intermolecular, I-N-T-E-R, that's bonds between different water molecules. And so that's where hydrogen bonds come into play. So just be careful with that, especially in free responses. If you start talking about hydrogen bonds or covalent bonds, don't get tripped up on that. Try to visualize it. It even helps. I would, even during a multiple choice test, I would on my piece of paper start to draw, I would draw, my oxygen here, my hydrogens here and there, and I would visualize like, oh, okay, well that can't be a hydrogen bond because hydrogen bonds are formed by partial charges interacting with each other. And it is going to be a weaker bond because it's usually drawn with dashed lines, but it's going to be a weaker bond. But cohesively, once you've got a bunch of them, right, that are made, then it's going to be cohesively a stronger bond. Okay, let's move on past polarity. And I think, here we go. A quick check-in question for you. So concept check number 1, I only have 5 of these, but go ahead, let's read it. It says, which statement is most accurate? A, the hydrogen bonding of a water molecule is what allows it to be polar. B, the polarity of a water molecule allows it to form hydrogen bonds. C, a water molecule is polar because of the unevenly shared electrons between the oxygen and hydrogen atoms. Or D, both A and C. Or E, both B and C. So if you want to just type in your answer, see how we're doing with this first idea. All right, so let's take a look. We've got E, both B and C. So great job, you two. Thanks for participating. We can talk about why it's not A and C. A is just backwards. It's talking about how the hydrogen bonding is what allows it to be polar, but really the polarity is of one water molecule. And we said that was the big misconception, is that a water molecule itself has hydrogen bonding, which is not true, right? One water molecule does not hydrogen bond with itself. That happens across several molecules. So it is the polarity of one water molecule that allows it to form those hydrogen bonds. So that's why we're looking at E for both B and C. Great job. Okay, I'll pause right here. Are there any questions you have about polarity or water structure before I move on to the characteristics of water, like cohesion, adhesion? That's where we're headed next. So Anything about polarity or hydrogen bonds that you have a question about? So we're feeling good about polarity of water and the structure of water, which is good. Awesome. I used to teach AP biology to a group of students who hadn't ever taken biology, and they hadn't taken chemistry in about 2 years. So this was always the toughest unit. So some of you, if you had just taken chemistry next year, you're probably in a really good spot of remembering these things about bonds and water and polarity. So hopefully that's the case for you. Okay, so just briefly, these are the big ideas we're going to go through. The way I've split it up is just the way that I like to do it in terms of properties of water. So cohesion and adhesion, I kind of talk about together because they are very similar. And honestly, we don't need to go into too much depth about it because it's that simple. Water's density, so we're talking about states of matter. So what, water as a solid, liquid, or gas, water as a biological solvent, and then the high specific heat nature of water. So within those, we'll break it down. I'll just briefly remind you about cohesion and adhesion because it sounds like most of you have already done this unit or you're in it right now, except for Phobos. Hopefully I'm saying your name right because I know you're in ecology right now, but this can be something you can look back at later too. Cohesion. Think like cooperate, you're working with a peer. So cohesion is when water sticks to itself. Adhesion is when it's sticking to other substances. And don't worry, I've got another slide on each of these things. So if you think I'm going too fast, always let me know. But I do have a separate slide for each of these things. These are just an overview. Okay. Water's density is all about, sorry, my computer's, all right. Water's density. The craziest thing about water, I think, is the fact that when it turns solid, it's less dense and ice floats. And most people would be like, duh, ice floats. I've seen it in my glass of ice water and things like that. But when you really think about it, it's pretty mind-blowing that ice floats. And it's super important too. As a solvent, the biological solvent, it used to be called the universal. Well, I bet some textbooks still call it the universal solvent. But I like to call it the biological solvent because it allows the dissociation or separation of materials, but it doesn't dissolve everything. Because if it did, we'd be in a lot of trouble. If water was constantly breaking everything apart, we would not be alive. And then high specific heat is about water's ability to be resistant to temperature change. And we'll talk about why that's so important too. Okay, so cohesion and adhesion. A lot of you might have done this in class. It's a pretty classic demo where you've got a penny and a water dropper and you drop, 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 and you see this huge bubble form and you can't even believe how many drops of water you were able to put on there. How many of you have done this before? Just say I've done it or I've seen it. If you've seen this demo before, just type in the comments and say, I've seen this one. This is a common one. This is even something that, you can do with elementary school kids because it's just dropping water, but you're still doing a hands-on lab. It's really cool. But now that you're in AP, we can talk about really why is that happening? Why, what properties of water are allowing so many drops to stay on this flat surface? You think that it would just fall over, right? And that it would just kind of splat everywhere. Okay, good. So Madeline's done this. Most students are usually surprised just how many drops of water can fit on there. If they asked you to predict how many, it's pretty cool to see how strong water is. So within that, you have cohesion and adhesion going on. The reason why water isn't just separating it from itself and just falling over the penny all over the table is because water sticks to itself because of hydrogen bonding. So with most of these things, you could explain each property and then say because of hydrogen bonding, because that's really what allows these things to happen. So water can stick together because of hydrogen bonds. We also have water sticking to the penny, right? So it's another substance. It's a metal substance. It's got charged particles in it as well. So adhesion is when you have water sticking to another another particle or substance. And so you've got water sticking to the penny as well, which is super important. And obviously for a penny, you're like, well, what does that have to do with life or living things? It is because of cohesion and adhesion that plants, this is an outward picture of a plant. But if we were to think about how water travels up a plant and how incredible it is that water goes from the roots to the shoots, which means like to the trunks and into the branches, into the leaves, right? The leaves have to get water to do photosynthesis, which you'll learn all about in a couple units. And again, that's why these initial units are so important to know well, because these things keep coming up when you get into your plant unit, when you get into your homeostasis unit and human anatomy. It's all going back to biochemistry. So if you have a good foundation, you should be in a better spot. So cohesion and adhesion, water molecules stick together and don't just fall down the tree, the inside of a tree, because they're sticking together, but also sticking to the sides of these vessels. Trees and plants, well, not all plants, but vascular plants have vessels just like we do. They're not arteries and veins, but they're called xylem and phloem, which you'll get to many months from now probably. But they transport materials, and water's ability to have cohesion and adhesion allows those trees to get the water they need. I'm going to skip that graduated cylinder pictures. We've already gone over enough. And then the last property that kind of combines cohesion and adhesion is surface tension. It's more of like a cool party trick. I mean, biologically, it is important. You know, insects use it to walk on. It also keeps water together in terms of in like a spherical shape. And this picture is really nice, where it just shows how normal water molecules that are being pulled at from all directions have a little less tension because they're constantly being pulled in different directions. Imagine someone pulling you front, left, right, backwards, like in all directions. But then if you're at the top, if you're a water molecule at the top, no one's pulling at you from the top. And so you're able to kind of hydrogen bond really well with the things next to you, right? So with the water molecules next to you. And so that creates tension at the top. So there's almost stronger bonds at the top, if you will, due to the fact that it's not being pulled at the top. Okay. Quick check. This property of water contributes to its ability to stick to certain substances. A, is it cohesion? B, surface tension. C, high specific heat. D, low boiling point. Or E, adhesion. So what property of water contributes to its ability to stick to certain substances? Go ahead and answer that. Type it in the corner over here. Shreya, thank you. Awesome. Bobos, Madeline, great. Haven't heard from Zion yet, but maybe you're gone for a minute. It's okay if you step away from your computer for a minute. We get that you can multitask. Oh, awesome. Yeah, everyone said E, adhesion. Good. So adhesion, big thing is that it's sticking to certain substances, not itself. So really good job. Awesome. Third one, real quick. Why is a water molecule so effective at hydrogen bonding with other water molecules? So now we're not talking about water with other substances. We're saying, why is a water molecule effective at hydrogen bonding with other water molecules? Is it A, the hydrogens in water have strong ionic bonds with oxygen? B, hydrogen is more electronegative than oxygen, so it is more likely to donate electrons. C, oxygen is electronegative and strongly pulls hydrogen's electrons, creating partial charges. Or D, none of the above. So go ahead and try concept check number 3. Okay. So why is a water molecule so effective at hydrogen bonding? Okay, we've got some C's, some D's. So the answer is C. Oxygen is electronegative, so this is why hydrogen bonding can even happen. The fact that oxygen is electronegative, and it creates partial charges. Without those partial charges, hydrogen bonding would not happen, right? This would just be a neutral molecule hanging around, not forming water. We would just have individual water molecules everywhere. We wouldn't actually have water that we know today. So it's the electronegativity of oxygen that allows that to happen. So great job, everybody. Okay, water as a solvent. Again, they used to call it the universal solvent. I don't like calling it that because sure, you can throw sugar or lemonade mix, or you could put food dye in water, or table salt, like this picture here showing sodium and chloride that was originally together as NaCl. And sure, water will break that up, no problem, because the partial negative and positive charges on the hydrogens and oxygens can interact with charged particles. But does anybody know what water cannot break up? Go ahead and take a guess if you can think about what water cannot break up. Yes, Phobos! I hope I'm saying your name right. I'm sorry. Is it Phobos? Yeah, okay. Oil, absolutely. Yeah, oil cannot break up, or water cannot break up oil. Oil is hydrophobic, right? And so, and this is a great thing that water cannot break up oil. If you've learned about cells yet, you learn about the structure of the plasma membrane and how it has hydrophobic heads that form that double layer membrane. And water is inside and outside of cells. So if water was able to just dissolve and disassociate molecules that make up a cell membrane, yeah, awesome, Madeline. If water was able to dissolve that, we would be in huge trouble. Cells would never have formed in the first place because in an aqueous solution or a water solution, water would just break that stuff up, and that would be terrible. So that's why I don't like to call it the universal solvent. And I know some other science teachers who agree. But we can call it a biological solvent, and that's really important for things in the body, in terms of biochemistry, in disassociating ions, helping with digestion. There's so much more that goes into it. And I think we'll talk more about that in one of the future lectures when we talk about building and breaking down macromolecules and how water is important for that. So stay tuned for more on water as a solvent. Okay, density of water. Ice floats, right? We all know that ice floats. It's amazing. If ice didn't float, we'd be in big trouble for sure. So normally when something goes from a gas to a liquid to a solid, if you can see this picture right here, it becomes more dense, right? Density has to do with how tightly things are compacted in the given volume. But with water, it's so cool. So in a liquid, it's actually going to be more dense than the solid, because in a liquid, think about how, like, if you're in a ocean or a lake or a pool, and water just kind of moves around, right? You're not in this jelly-like substance. It's very fluid, right? We think of fluid, we think of water. And that's because hydrogen bonds are constantly being broken and reformed between water molecules. So they're very fluid, if you will, like fluid as in liquid, but also fluid as in changing all the time. But once it starts to get colder and freeze, just like if you think about the kinetic energy of something, when we heat it up, it's super fast and all over the place. If we cool something down, it slows down. And so those hydrogen bonds just kind of form and they stay together. Instead of forming and rebaking and forming and rebreaking, and then we get all these compact hydrogen bonds, you get a nice lattice structure where they're a little bit further apart, which makes the overall whole less dense. And so that's gonna, if you're less dense, you're gonna float. And that's just wild. That's super important. If this did not happen, lakes and oceans and rivers and ponds, they would freeze from the bottom up. And think about what would happen to all the life living in those water structures. So I'm sure, Madeline, since you're from Grand Rapids, you see all the water that I see in Michigan and all the life that's in there, all the fish, all the marine life, everything. If it didn't freeze on the top, right, everything below would perish in the wintertime. So it allows it allows those ecosystems in water where ice will form to survive. So it's super important. Okay, we're almost finished here. We got heat of vaporization and high heat capacity. They kind of go hand in hand. But if you look at this table here, sorry if it's a little too small, but it just talks about the heat capacity of certain materials. So as you can see, water has a heat capacity of 4.2, which is drastically higher than so many of those other things. We've got air, water vapor, granite, wood, and iron. So specific heat capacity has to do with how much energy it takes to change something's temperature. So for example, like at the iron at the bottom, right? So a piece of metal has a really low heat capacity, which means it takes very little energy to make it spike in temperature, which is why, for example, if you were to sit on some metal benches that have been sitting out in the sun all day, you could burn yourself. You could actually burn your skin. Actually, my daughter it was awful. We were at a splash pad in the summertime, and she got second-degree burns on her hands because she fell on a metal grate that was at the splash pad, and it was so hot. And so those substances, they're under the same sun that all that water in the lake or someone's pool or wherever, they're under the same sun. It's not a stronger sun that's hitting those metal things, but it has to do with this quality called heat capacity, and water's is very high. The reason that's important is that it keeps things temperate. It regulates the water temperature so that, if it's a really hot day or a really cold winter, we're not drastically changing temperatures overnight. Obviously, winds can come in and stir up water and change things, right? Like hurricanes, or even just a storm over Lake Michigan can really stir up the water and change it, but that's not the same thing as changing from high heat capacity from the sun. And so there's my picture of Lake Michigan, all these inland lakes. It's much cooler if you live right by the lake. If you go a little bit inland, it's not going to be as cool. And that's because the areas closer to water are going to be a little bit colder. And because the water itself is not going to be increasing in heat as much. Heat of vaporization, I like to think of sweating for this. So you're sitting in the sun, you're sweating, and heat of vaporization has to do with how much energy it takes to turn that substance into vapor, right? So to get rid of it, to evaporate it. It takes a decent amount of energy for that to happen to water too. And so if you're outside in the sun, you're sweating and you're working out and you have water droplets all over you, that's part of your thermal regulation. That is, trying to cool you off by sweating. But until those sweat droplets that are mostly water, until they evaporate, it doesn't actually cool you off much. And so because it takes a lot of energy to evaporate a water molecule, energy is taken away from your body, from the surface of your skin, and that's called evaporative cooling. And so when you get into, I can't remember which unit it is with this new curriculum, but when you start talking about thermal regulation and how animals who can regulate their own temperature rely on that property of water to survive, like us, we rely on sweating. It's really important there. And that's why on a humid day, it feels so stinking hot if you're sweating, because it takes a lot more energy to try to evaporate that droplet of water than it normally would. And so you're just stuck with all this water and sweat on you. And so you don't get the benefit of evaporative cooling. Okay, so we do have time for a quick free response practice. So I just kind of came up with this today. Your real free responses would probably also include some sort of a data set or an image or a model that you're looking at, but I just typed this one up. So it says, two scientists are having an argument about water's biochemistry and characteristics. Scientist one claims that water is the universal solvent, and scientist two claims that water is a strong biological solvent. Which scientist is most accurate? Defend your answer by showing knowledge about the properties of water. So I'm going to encourage you to just take a second, and you don't have to type it in the chat. I want you to actually just do it on your own on a piece of paper, but think about how you would attack this question. So you have two scientists, you have to choose which one is most accurate. most importantly, we're starting to build on your ability to defend and answer. So you're not just answering like, oh, hydrogen bonding, or oh, adhesion, cohesion. We're thinking a little more deeply, and how could you defend either one? Okay, so if I were you, we'll do this part together. I would first decide which scientist is correct, right? So is it the universal solvent scientist, or is it the biological solvent, right? If you've been here this whole stream, you probably know what I would choose, but a lot of the times in the AP Bio free response questions, well, not a lot of the times, it can happen where even if you choose the wrong avenue of answering something, if your content and defense is correct in terms of it lines up scientifically and biologically correct, you could get some partial points thrown your way rather than get just everything wrong because you chose the wrong scientist. So if you choose universal solvent, but you go into, if you say, yeah, it's a universal solvent, and here's why, because here would be the things I'd be looking for. Talk about water structure and how oxygen is electronegative, which makes water a polar molecule. Explain what a polar molecule is, right? Then talk about how, because of the polarity, hydrogen bonds can be formed. And what do hydrogen bonds look like? Maybe draw a little diagram and show that you know what a hydrogen bond is. So again, if you choose universal solvent, but you go through those steps of defending, like, hey, I know water structure, I know the biochemistry of this, and here's why I think it's the universal solvent, and you come up with 10 examples of, hey, it dissolves this, it dissociates this, it helps break down macromolecules, it's important for digestion and blood chemistry. So if you go into all that, you would be fine. Especially if you were my student, I'd be like, okay, that's pretty legitimate. If you talked about the biological solvent and you did the same thing, you talked about polarity, hydrogen bonding, electronegativity of oxygen. Again, I'd say that it's amazing. Great job. The idea is whatever topic you bring up, it's important that you show you know it. Don't just use a buzzword and say, oh yeah, hydrogen bonding, that's why. Well, the AP reader is going to want to see that you know what hydrogen bonding is and have a good explanation of it. Okay. If you are interested, I know there's only 5 of you left on here. Can you give me a yes or a no if you'd be interested in future streams where we have a kind of more official free response question where I go over exactly how I would write it? Would you like to do something like that? Just say yes or no. If you'd like to see free response practice questions where I kind of go through what an expectation of an answer would be, what a good defense looks like. I know today we kind of just threw it together and had some ideas, but if that'd be something that you'd like. And maybe more towards the end of the semester or AP season, maybe we'll just do a live stream of like just free response question and just kind of hammer out a couple of them. I think that'd be really helpful. Okay, awesome. Thank you. Thank you. Sounds like everyone's game for a free response. So I've got some homework to do myself to make them up. Okay, I do have a couple more. We have a few more minutes left. So if you want to keep participating, I have, I think, 4 more multiple choice. So let's get going. We've got as ice melts. This one's kind of funky, so read it carefully. As ice melts, A, hydrogen bonds are broken. Water molecules become less tightly packed. Water molecules become less dense. And water molecules become more tightly packed. I just realized there's 2 correct answers here. Sorry about that. There are technically 2 correct answers, but there's one that's more correct in my opinion. So as ice is melting, that means we're going from ice to a liquid. Awesome. Everyone said D. Good. Water molecules become more tightly packed. That's perfect. Great. We know our property about ice being less tightly packed and thus less dense. So very good job. Okay. Which of the following is dependent on the ability of water molecules to form hydrogen bonds with other molecules besides water? A, is it the evaporative cooling of skin surfaces? B, the milder temperatures of coastal regions compared to inland? C, the ability of certain insects to walk on the surface of water? Or D, the universality of water as a solvent? So it's dependent on the ability of water molecules to form hydrogen bonds with other molecules. So think about which one would be best here. I'm realizing that I'm that teacher who always makes the correct answer the same option. Did not do that on purpose. But yes, really good. It's D, the universality of water as a solvent. The reason it's a solvent is because its partial charges are interacting and forming hydrogen bonds with other molecules. So really good job. All right, that's everything I have for you tonight. If you don't have any questions, go ahead, and if you are on Twitter, I don't have any of the other social medias, but I'm at Mrs. Parnan on social media for Twitter, and that will help you kind of stay tuned to when I'm streaming. We've also got a few other AP Bio streamers who are really good, so follow Fiveable too, which I showed you in the beginning of the stream, but that'll just keep you in the loop of what topics are coming next and things like that. So I'll leave that up there. There any questions? All right, no questions from this event. Okay, everybody, thank you so much for tuning in, and hopefully we'll see you in a couple days. My next stream is Monday, September 9th at 8 o'clock, and we'll do macromolecules. All right, or yeah, I think I'm doing macromolecules. All right, everybody, we'll talk to you soon. Bye. Thank you.